There we go. Okay, very good afternoon to you all. My name's Tom Rebbeck. I'm a partner with Analysys Mason. We are a research and consulting firm focused on telecoms and technology. Now, the exam question that I set myself today was, whatever happened to IoT? Now, the short answer is, it's doing fine, thank you very much. Now, the longer answer is the presentation that I'll go through in the following slides. I should just warn you, I have lots of charts in my presentation. I was once told you should never have more than 1 or 2 charts in a presentation because the average audience, they would lose their attention. So I'm gambling that you are not an average audience and you will stay with me as I go through these charts. So let's look at interest in IoT over time. So this is taken from Google Trends for the search word Internet of Things, and you can see how it's peaked, how it's performed over time. Now, I used to do the same, but for the search term M2M, and I got all of these really strange peaks, huge amounts of interest, and I could never work out quite what was going on. And then I found out that there was a boy band in Malaysia called M2M, and whenever they released a new single, there was a huge spike in interest. Not the case for IoT. There's no boy band that I'm aware of called IoT, so this is a better reflection. Now we can see what happens, and I think this more or less aligns with our expectations. If you think about the interest in IoT, peaked in about 2015, and then has gradually fallen away since then. Stayed relatively constant the last few years, but quite a long way off the peak. I don't know if you've ever come across the jinx of Sports Illustrated. So when an athlete is on the front cover of Sports Illustrated, that's quite often the peak of their career, and after that they get injured or they never perform quite as well again. This is maybe the HBR equivalent of the Sports Illustrated jinx. This was November 2014. Michael Porter, who you've probably come across, Porter's 5 Forces, you kind of do him at business school. He wrote a long piece on IoT. Just before, as I say, just before the peak of interest in IoT. Now the flip side is obviously what's happening with AI. No surprise, already in this conference this morning, there were lots of mentions of AI as we went through. It was bubbling along relatively low, and then over the last, 2-3 years, absolutely exploded in terms of interest in AI. It's a kind of flip of what we've seen from IoT. So that's general interest, and I think it's reflected from what I've seen in industry events. So this was something I wrote back in 2023, reflecting on Mobile World Congress. So in 2023, you'd have to search IoT on the stands. It was there, but it was kind of hidden away, which was a massive contrast to 2019. 2019, when I was at Mobile World Congress, IoT was on every stand, often as part of the justification for 5G. 2023, obviously lots of mentions of AI, lots of mentions of satellite. There were quite a few mentions of private networks, people demoing private networks, which were actually IoT, really examples of IoT, though they didn't mention that. So in a sense, IoT has fallen out of favor at industry events. It's also fallen out of favor for investors. So there aren't that many listed IoT companies. So there are only a few where we can see what's happened with their share price. This is a company, Core, you're probably aware of, IoT connectivity company based in the US. It listed back in 2021, and as you can see, its share price has basically collapsed since then. Now, I think it's reasonable to say that the cause of this collapse isn't actually to do with its main business of IoT. It's actually still doing relatively well and growing and so on. It's more to do with the way it was financed at the point of when it listed, it raised a lot of debt. When interest rates went up, that debt got very expensive, and that caused all sorts of problems. So that's really behind this. It's not so much the IoT business as the way it was financed. But it's still, this is a problem for the IoT industry. Whenever we talk to investors who are interested in IoT, they will say, but what about Core? What's happened with Core? So you have to always explain what the debt situation was and say the main business is okay. The other listed company that we have, which is a relatively pure play IoT company, is in Japan. Soracom. It was owned by KDDI for a while, Then it had what they called a swing buy IPO, something I'd never heard of, but they spun it off, put it onto the stock exchange. At listing, the share price was about 2,000 yen, and it also hasn't performed particularly well. It's down to about 1,000 yen today. So from the investor side, less interest in IoT than we saw before. Also from telecoms operators, and I realise this is all a bit depressing. I do get more positive later on, but we get the negative stuff first. From telecoms operators, this is a piece that my colleague Ibrahim Kassaji wrote last month, looking at the IoT business of many of the telecoms operators, and in his view, many of them, perhaps most of them, are subscale. They're too small to be profitable. He built from his research, he thinks if you've got, say, less than about 6 million connections, it's probably hard for those operators to be profitable. And so they should be looking at more radical solutions, either selling their business, merging it with somebody else, or closing it down. And we've already seen some operators do this. They haven't publicized this, but we know from the conversations that we've had, they've reduced their efforts on IoT, they've reduced their teams, they've moved it back into wholesale. So we can see this reduced effort, reduced exposure from the operators in IoT. And perhaps this is in part explains, so even for the operators that have big IoT businesses and they're very successful in IoT, IoT is just a tiny, tiny proportion of total revenue. So figures here for Telefonica, 2.6% of total revenue, KDDI, 3%, KPN, 1.7%. So these are the operators that are doing well. For lots of other operators, it's probably 1%, it's probably less than 1% of total revenue. Now that also matters because of expectation. If we think back to 2015, there were papers put out, I remember one by Huawei, that was saying that operators should be targeting 20% of their revenue to come from IoT. Now, that was bonkers. It was nonsense, and everybody knew it was kind of nonsense at the time. But I think from the operator's perspective, they thought, well, 20% is never going to be 20%. But if it was half of that or a quarter of that, then it's a good business and worth going into. Now, for most operators, it's a tenth of that. It's probably 1%, less than a tenth. So the reality versus expectation from 2015 is quite a marked difference. So investor interest or attitudes to IoT, mixed. We saw those share prices going down. The operator sentiment is mixed as well. Quite a few of them looking at exiting the business or thinking of doing something different with their IoT business. And the wider interest in IoT has shifted on. Obviously, things like AI have really taken people's attention away from IoT. Now, onto the more positive news. So the rest of it is why I think actually IoT is in a fairly good space. Now, apologies to an extent, all of the information I've got is from telecoms operators, so slightly different from the world that you maybe sit in, but we have good, consistent information from the telecoms operators on their IoT business, so it's quite a nice, it's a reliable source of information. Now, this is from KDDI. I already mentioned KDDI. They had the 3% of their revenue coming from IoT, so as telecoms operators go, they're doing very well. And you can see this is their connections performance over the past 4 years. Now, this is a remarkable performance, and any business would like to see their growth go like this. Super steady, super consistent for 4 years, quarter on quarter, adding connections and adding them at a steady, predictable rate. So huge growth overall and a very impressive CAGR. So they've gone from something like 20 million connections to about 50 million connections. So that growth is impressive, but it's also impressive just the way they've done it. It's just been such steady, repeatable growth. And as I say, anybody running a business, you love to see charts like this. So that's KDDI. So that's the most impressive example. But even if you look at other operators, so this is Telefonica, it's a similar picture, some wobbles. I think this may be some changes in reporting would explain this. But again, you see quarter-on-quarter growth, maybe not the same level of growth, but still very impressive growth in connections. Similar picture for, this is Vodafone. Again, there's some wobbles, some quarters when they've had declines in connections, but overall, over the past 4 years, that's a real nice story of growing connections, growing connection numbers. And even if you look at some of the smaller operators, so this is the smallest one I could find. The numbers for this is Telia in Latvia, so a very small operator. And its numbers aren't quite as good, but it's still good, consistent, solid growth. I have the numbers also for Spain. The reporting for Spain is a bit mixed because there are periods when the operators report and when they don't report. But again, you can see the steady growth in connection numbers. It's all positive. It's a really positive, from a connection story, it's a really positive picture. And also when we look in terms of revenue, so I've picked some companies, mostly telecoms operators, their revenue in local currencies, so there's no impact of currency, and we can see the growth rate over the past 4 years. So 26%, 20%, 14%, and so on. Even Telefonica, the only one that I could find that was declining, I suspect that's more to do with changes in reporting than actually changes in the overall business. So overall, a strong, this is CAGR, annualized growth in their IoT revenue. It's not as fast as connections, there's pricing pressure and so on, but still strong revenue growth over the past 4 years. It's a good picture. The reasons for that growth, what's underpinning that growth, are continued demand in the two core sectors for IoT. Now, obviously there's lots of IoT in other sectors, don't get me wrong, but the two ones that really drive growth are utilities, and the energy sector, and the automotive sector. Some other presenters talked about the utilities market earlier this morning with electricity meters and water meters and gas meters and so on. This is our figures. These are historic, so these aren't forecasts. This is what's actually happened, and you can see a growth, sort of 10 million a year, new connections in Western Europe, so new meters being connected, and there's still quite a lot more growth to come. So that's partly underpinning it. Then the other thing underpinning it is obviously the sales of new cars. New cars are connected, often replacing cars that weren't connected. Here I'm deliberately showing electric vehicles. As you know, strong growth in the sale of electric vehicles. And electric vehicles are important because EVs use roughly 3 times the amount of data from a conventionally powered car. So sales every year, this is the EU 27, it's up to about 1.5 million. If you add in Norway and the UK, it's about 2 million. So again, underpinned by this consistent, steady growth in those markets. And as we know, you know this better than I do, there's lots of new developments coming on stream, whether it's micro-mobility, the V16, we talked about this earlier. These are monitors if you've broken down in Spain, you put the beacon on your car. Obviously electric cars need charging stations, they're connected. And things like parcel lockers. So lots of new, kind of the long tail of IoT, lots of new ideas coming on stream to help drive further growth. And thinking back then to investors, this all makes IoT, all of the attributes of IoT make them attractive to investors. It's a scale business. We're often talking about millions of connections, consistently strong growth. We've seen that in the connections charts that we looked at earlier. Long-term visibility churn is super low for most of these businesses, so it means you've got a really good long-term visibility of your revenue. Investors love that. They're also relatively low in terms of capital intensity. It's not like building a data center where you have to make a huge capex investment up front and then hope it rewards you later on. Here, there's less early capex. So they're all attributes that make it attractive to investors, and that helps explain some of the really big investments that we've seen recently. So Wireless Logic raised some money at a valuation of £3.5 billion. That's not purely about IoT. They have other aspects of their business, but a large part of that is underpinned by this IoT business. And then once also raised $60 million in an announcement earlier this year. So we can see investors coming back to IoT. We saw a strong wave of investment in 2021. It then declined for a few years. We're seeing it come back. Some major funding rounds. That's not to say that there aren't challenges. Clearly, there's a few challenges. I list some of them here. You can probably think of many more. One question is around demand. So we talked about demand for utilities and for cars, but at some point that levels off. What grows the massive opportunities beyond that? We haven't really seen any big consumer IoT markets yet, so maybe there's demand there. In terms of supply, most of the successful IoT companies are still relatively small. We don't see many unicorns, the kind of billion-dollar valued companies in IoT. technology, and this is something I think you know better than I do, but all of the different multiple standards, something Jim talked about this morning in terms of the cellular standard, still a very confusing market. And of course, on top of that, we have the position of the global economy, all of the uncertainty around tariffs and even potentially reduced attention to the climate crisis, which has been one of the drivers in many of the IoT initiatives. So that's added uncertainty. So just to close, market sentiment, I think, has been against IoT for the past few years. More attention has been particularly on AI, but on other areas. But I think when you look at it underneath, IoT is still doing remarkably well. We're still seeing very strong growth in connections. The fundamentals of the revenues are still looking very positive. And perhaps we just need to reset expectations. The expectations that were set 10 years ago in 2015 were just too high, were never going to be realized. And if we reset those expectations to a better level, we'll be happier. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.